He's playing. Not maybe, not we'll see, but confirmed Aaron Rodgers will start Sunday against the Buffalo Bills, even while he's still working through a fractured left wrist. Coach Mike Tomlin called it all systems go after Rodgers logged full participation in practice and came off the injury report with no designation. Pittsburgh Steelers. That line alone flips the emotional script for Pittsburgh. A week ago, the locker room braced for life without its veteran leader when Rodgers left the Cincinnati game clutching his non-throwing wrist and missed the loss to Chicago. Backup Mason Rudolph filled in. Competent, steady, but far from the headline-grabbing difference maker, completing 24 of 31 passes for 171 yards, a touchdown, and an interception in a narrow defeat. That's the practical context. Pittsburgh survived a weekend with its backup and now has the option to return to the man who was hired to be its closer. So what does it mean when a 41-year-old quarterback decides to play through a fractured bone in his non-throwing wrist? Practically, Rodgers won't need surgery, which is the medical good news that opened the door to a quick turnaround. The team's medical staff has focused on bracing and rehab rather than a long-term fix. Psychologically, it's enormous. Rodgers' presence stabilizes timing, checks off the trust box for teammates, and changes how opponents prepare. But it also raises real questions. Will the brace still create subtle friction in ball handling on bootlegs, snaps, or in the quick game mechanics that separate an average throw from an elite one? The Steelers seem to think the risk is manageable, enough to let him play, but it's a bet on experience over caution. ESPN.com. There's a second layer, the offensive line shakeup. Broderick Jones, the rookie left tackle who had started the season well, suffered a neck injury last week and has been ruled out for this one. Pittsburgh's response has been pragmatic. Andrus Peat is expected to step in at left tackle, with swing tackle Calvin Anderson also showing the chops from his work with the first team in practice. That matters because Rodgers is back into a lineup with a significant change at the blindside spot, the very place Buffalo will attack, and the Bills bring a pass rush that can exploit even the subtlest of protection hiccups. In short, Rodgers' return helps, but the line's personnel changes bite into the margin. Behind the steel curtain, let's walk through the drama of the last week like a 3-act story, because that's how fans will live it on Sunday. Act 1, the scare and the steadiness. The image of Rodgers favoring his wrist after a hit was ugly for Steelers fans. The immediate relief was the medical read that no surgery was required. That converted panic into a plan. Brace, rehab, evaluate, which is why the talking heads moved from season ender to day-to-day. Meanwhile, Rudolph's start against the Bears proved two things. He can manage the game, and the team's identity shifts without Rodgers. Pittsburgh didn't suddenly become a different franchise. They simply lost the tiny improvisational edges that a veteran like Rodgers brings. NFL.com Act 2, the testing and the chess. Rodgers logged limited practices earlier in the week, then ramped up to full participation by Thursday and Friday, earning the clear to play. That's the medical staff and coaching staff converging on a shared judgment. The 41-year-old can function safely enough to start. But we must be honest. Practiced fully isn't a guarantee of in-game comfort. The Bills are not a forgiving opponent. Even a limited loss of snap feel or the need to compensate on hand placement can create windows that a defense like Buffalo's will exploit. The Steelers will have to script quick, high-percentage plays early, protect the ball, and avoid letting Rodgers face heavy rushes on 3rd and long. Pittsburgh Steelers Act 3, the decision and its ripple effects. Pittsburgh's standings and playoff hopes are tighter than they feel. Rodgers returning increases the team's upside immediately. Better vertical passing, more trust on 3rd downs, and the leadership that smooths late-game moments. But the offensive line questions and the fact that Rodgers missed a week of game reps insert uncertainty. Does Pittsburgh lean into quick-release concepts to mask the left tackle swap? Do they open with more run to settle the QB and protect the wrist? The answers to those coaching moves will show whether this return was a masterstroke or a necessary gamble. Behind the steel curtain, there's also the human frame you don't see in the box score. Rodgers is a veteran who changes locker room tempo. His presence calms bodies and sharpens focus. For younger receivers, DK Metcalf among them, who's also been moving back toward health, Seeing Rodgers under center is like having a coach on the field. For Rudolph, it's a lesson in humility and readiness. He performed well enough when asked, but the team's implied vote of confidence is clear. They brought Rodgers in this offseason expecting leadership and late-game competence. Starting him on Sunday reaffirms that investment. Pittsburgh Steelers in. So what should you watch for during the game? First, the pocket integrity. How often does Rodgers have to use his legs, and does that expose the left side where Jones would usually anchor? Second, the short area work. Checkdowns, quick crossers, and timing with DK Metcalf on intermediate routes. These are the throws that will show whether the wrist is truly non-factor. Third, play calling philosophy. If Mike Tomlin leans into more runs and quicker throws early, that's a sign of respect for both the injury and a tough Buffalo front. Fourth, late game decision making. Will Rodgers look like the field general Pittsburgh expected when the fourth quarter tightens? Pittsburgh Steelers. Here's the honest bottom line. Pittsburgh made a reasonable choice. Rodgers not needing surgery and practicing fully are huge positives. His return adds a layer of competence that Rudolph can't replicate in terms of timing and elite-level pocket manipulation. But it's not a clean, problem-solved headline. The team's left tackle is out, the Bills are formidable, and Rodgers missed game reps. This is a calculated risk to chase a playoff push while the window remains open. If you want a memorable image going into Sunday, picture this. The veteran quarterback walks onto the field with a brace on his non-throwing wrist, not as a sign of frailty, but as a band on a veteran's armor. He's choosing to step back into the storm because that's what leaders do. The real story won't be the decision to play. It'll be how the Steelers manage everything around him to give that decision a chance to pay off. Watch the first two series closely. They'll tell you whether Pittsburgh is protecting its investment or asking a player to carry too much risk. Either way, this Sunday will be less about the headline that he's starting and more about whether that start moves the needle on a season the Steelers still believe they can salvage. Aaron Rodgers is back under center. After missing last week with a fractured wrist in his non-throwing arm, Rodgers has been cleared to start Sunday's game against the Buffalo Bills, Mike Tomlin told reporters Friday. The veteran QB didn't need surgery on the wrist, logged limited practice reps late in the week, and will attempt to power the Steelers through a tough matchup while wearing the sort of grit that's defined his career. Rodgers suffered the injury in Week 11 against the Cincinnati Bengals and sat out Week 12 when Mason Rudolph stepped in and nearly won a shootout. Rudolph finished the Bears game 24 of 31 for 171 yards with a touchdown and an interception. The former third-rounder owns an 8-5-1 record as a starter over his career and showed he can steady the ship when called upon. But this is Aaron Rodgers' team by design, and the club is rolling him back onto the field. Tomlin was clear about the deciding factor, safety. We were watching his status closely, the coach said this week, and medical tests showed Rodgers could play without surgery. That matters. For a 41-year-old QB who's learning a new offense and trying to manage the wear and tear of a long career, avoiding an invasive procedure is a best-case outcome. Still, playing through a wrist fracture is not trivial. It will require careful monitoring, smart snap management, and likely a wrap or protective plate when he takes the field. On paper, Rodgers' 2025 numbers look solid. Roughly 1,900 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions through 11 games. He's had a rocky stretch. A rough outing in Los Angeles before the injury produced one of his lower passer ratings of the year. But those ups and downs are part of the veteran narrative. The Steelers traded for him on a one-year deal this offseason to provide instant upgrade and leadership, and they'll take every snap of that experience in a critical stretch of the schedule. The protection picture is a wrinkle. Left tackle Broderick Jones, who started this season in that role, is out for Sunday after suffering a neck injury in Week 12. Calvin Anderson stepped in last week and acquitted himself, yielding just 1 pressure on 13 pass blocking snaps in relief per PFF, but Jones's absence removes some of the line continuity Rodgers prefers. That makes quick releases, clean pre-snap reads, and smart play design even more essential this week. If Rodgers can't get time to climb the pocket, The Bills' pass rush will make it a long afternoon. This is also about context. Rodgers is joining a Steelers team that expects to compete now. Signing with Pittsburgh was meant to be a short window to chase wins. Playing through a fracture underscores his commitment, but it raises the stakes on situational coaching and roster support. Rudolph showed last week that the team can move forward if Rodgers needs to come out, which gives Tomlin a roster flexibility